destruction. I can't yet. I'm not ready. My king nears.
Hi guys, welcome to another video, and this one I wanted to do a final update for the Bear SLAMS Titan build because I pretty much come to the end of my playtime with the build. I'm starting to get to the point where the end game just isn't that enjoyable anymore because I've done, most of the content, and I kind of want to move on to trying some other things with different builds and other new things that were added in this patch. So in this video I wanted to do a bit of an overview of the final upgrades that I got for my build. And I also want to discuss some of the upgrades you could go for if you were to play this build beyond what I've done and, push it really deep into the end game and go for those very high-end upgrades. So I've got a few gear upgrades from the last video. The first is the belt. Now this is a pretty big upgrade for the build because I'm playing the lightning coil variant of the setup that I've got over on Mobalytics, and I've discussed in a previous video how, this item enables me to get pretty reliable frenzy charge gain during mapping, because of Vadako's Roar, and that's a charm there that makes it so whenever you take lightning damage from a hit, you gain a frenzy charge. And this belt has just a bunch of stats that I really want for this build. So I've got a tier 1 life modifier on there, it has armor on there as well, which is really nice because I'm stacking quite a bit of armor. And we also have resistances that I need. But I was also able to unveil a desecrated modifier there, charms gain charges per second. And that just makes the whole setup that one bit more reliable, and having a more reliable setup for those frenzy charges just means that you can benefit from the skill speed from charge regulation more often. So what this basically translates into is that every 5 seconds I'm gaining a full charm charge on Vadako's Roar. And that may not seem like a lot, but when you're mapping and you're already gaining charges from monsters and things like that, it just means that the charm is going to be more reliable overall. So that modifier right there is not a normal belt modifier, it's a desecration specific modifier, and it's an Amanarmu modifier, which is one of the particular liches. And to get that, you're going to want to use an Omen of the Leech when you actually apply the desecration modifier. And what happens then is when you actually go to reveal that modifier, it's going to guarantee a random Amanarmu modifier. And if you look over at the modifiers on PoEDB to see what that can actually reveal for you, there are only 3 of those modifiers for this specific lich, and 2 of them are usable by this build. One is this modifier right here, which grants you, charm charges every second, and the other one is a chance to not consume any charges when you actually use the charm. I think it rolls around 20% or something like that. So that is actually a pretty good modifier as well. So either of those modifiers are going to be good, and try to get this on an ornate belt because ornate belt already has reduced charm charges used on the implicit. But there are other good options for belt implicit, such as stun threshold or just flat armor. All those things are quite good for this setup. Now, one of the other upgrades I have there is my gloves, which have a flat fizz roll there, tier 1 flat fizz. They also have a tier 1 life modifier. And I was able to unveil a desecrated modifier there for rarity. And once again, as I mentioned in a previous video there, I was trying to get as much rarity as I can into this build. I believe I've got to around 120% rarity at this point from all of my gear pieces combined, which is quite good. I just don't like rarity at all, but it's something you're kind of forced to play with. And so this was a pretty big upgrade for the build compared to the previous gloves. And the other upgrade that I've got there is the amulet, which again is just more rarity. If you compare it to the previous amulet, the only thing that's really different for this build is the rarity modifier there. And my previous amulet basically had a low life modifier roll, but it was also a bloodstone amulet, so it had a life modifier as the implicit. And this is basically just 1 extra rarity roll compared to the last one. And so that's also an upgrade for the build. And that is pretty much it. That's where I've got to on the build. I'm currently level 93, I believe. And my gems, all my gems and things are unchanged compared to the last video. I have got a level 19 gem now on both Furious Slam and Walking Calamity. Level 20 gem is very, very expensive. I haven't been able to find one myself. And to be honest with you, like I said, I want to kind of move on and try some other things, so I'm not going to invest more into this build. But all of the gems and things are the same as on Mobalytics, so you can go over there and check those out if you want to. Over on the passive tree, it's also unchanged. The only thing there is that I've gained a few levels, which has gone into these two wheels here. So that's just a bit more armor scaling and, you know, armor to elemental scaling. If I were to continually level up here and get to those much higher levels, you know, level 96, 97, I would actually fill in both of these wheels. Now, I want to just discuss here at the end what upgrades you could go for if you want to continuously push this build further. So the first thing would be the weapon there. This would be a pure physical damage weapon. It would have a high percentage fizz roll, you know, ideally merciless, so 170% plus. And then you would also have a flat physical roll instead of cold. And you would have all of the suffixes that this one has, except for the mana roll there would be replaced with attack speed. And then you still have the gainer's extra fizz. The reason why I have gainer's extra fizz on here, because I have been asked that a few times in the comments, and it's actually really important that it's gainer's extra fizz and not gainer's a random element there as one of the other essences, and that is because this modifier allows Walking Calamity to leech. So Walking Calamity is a skill that kind of creates a bunch of meteors falling from the sky, and this skill converts 100% of physical damage to fire damage. And we have Leech modifiers. We're actually quite reliant on leeching in this build in terms of recovery for both life and mana. So this is actually a really nice quality of life thing to have, that you have gain as extra physical, because that gain modifier will not be converted to fire. And you can actually see that here when you pop out Walking Calamity. You can see that even though the majority of the damage is going to be fire because that's being converted over from the physical damage, the gain as extra fizz there is actually still being dealt as physical damage, and that means that we can leech from those modifiers. Then for other kind of, high-end game upgrades, for example, I have a ring here that doesn't have any life, so that would be crazy if this ring had, all of those resistances and rarity and life. That would be an extremely good ring. So that's another upgrade I could look for there. Something else is the amulet, of course. This one currently has a mana regeneration rate roll on the suffix, which is not really ideal. That could be +3 to melee skill gem levels, which would make this a ridiculous amulet at that point. So that is another upgrade that I could get. And another one there is the gloves, of course, for melee gem levels as well. So there are a lot of high-end upgrades that you can get for the build. The other things would be like corrupting your gear for extra sockets and things like that. Then you're getting into real min-max territory. But as I said, I've pretty much done what I want to do on the build, and it's been a fun build to play. I feel like I've kind of achieved the goal of having this kind of slam character with giant area of effects and things like that. It definitely all came together at one point, and it feels very good to play, and it performs quite well. And I think one of the reasons that the build feels so good compared to, I know there's been a lot of complaints about like the bear slams and things like that feeling clunky. One of the reasons is just the setup that I've gone for, where I really prioritize speed over everything else. Especially this in the weapon swap, right? The Amor Mandragora unique talisman. This is 30% skill speed all the time, right? Which is just ridiculous when you think about it. 30% skill speed is actually so much power when you consider, we're anointing acceleration here, which is 3% move speed and 10% skill speed. You can look at some other notables on the tree, such as over here, 10% skill speed while shapeshifted, right? That's a notable. We're gaining 3 lots of that all the time with that buff in the offhand, so that's basically 30% attack speed all the time for all of our skills, and 30% Warcry speed as well. So, that on top of all the things like the offhand Warcry speed tech and things like that has made this build feel a lot more comfortable to play, and kind of alleviated some of those issues with the build being a bit clunky and things like that other people have experienced. But that is it for this one, and that's a wrap on the Bear SLAMS Titan build. I hope you guys are enjoying it if you're playing it. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.